All right. Woohoo. All right. It's been a while since I've done this, but we're going to do another coaches chat. And today I'm here with Tim Floyd, who's going to introduce himself in a minute. But just a refresher, I'm Shannon Keegan, founder of Intrepid Water and Marathon Swim Stories. And I've been coaching people online and wherever they are, and as well as in my backyard endless pool and doing clinics and all kinds of things for the last, gosh, it's coming up on 6-7 years now. I've been a swimmer my whole life, mostly open water marathon swimming just in the last 10 years, and recently swam 22 miles in Lake George back about a month and a half ago now, which was an interesting experiment on a lot of levels. It might touch on that a little bit today, but I did write all about it if anyone wants to go look at my blog at intrepidwater.com. But Tim, tell us about yourself and your experiences.
Yeah, sure. Very similar. My name's Tim Floyd, longtime swim coach. I've been a triathlon coach for a while now too, but mostly I come from a swim background and swam through high school and college. I was not a distance swimmer. I was a sprinter, but I've been a coach now for 30 years. So I got my first coaching job at 19 and been coaching swimming ever since. So yeah, work with a lot of, now I pretty much work with exclusively triathletes, pro triathletes. And I got about 2 years ago, I got an endless pool and do one-on-one work with a lot of the local USA club swimming kids and some triathletes, and run clinics. And I host a couple of water swims a year too. So anything from 1,250 meters to 10K.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning before we started the recording about kind of the movement you're seeing in triathlon. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I've seen is that triathlon kind of peaked a few years ago, and it goes like a lot of sports, it'll go through, peaks and valleys and plateaus, and it's kind of plateaued right now. COVID had something to do with that, but some of it I think has to do with, as triathlon's gotten more competitive and people have done it and they're getting older, they're looking for new challenges. And one of the challenges that I've seen has been people that don't come from a swimming background are going out and tackling some of the fairly significant marathon open water swims. And, I coached a woman through Manhattan Island Marathon swim, so 20 bridges, although I still call it the Manhattan Island Marathon swim. And yeah, she had done Ironman, but didn't come from a swim background, but just grew to really like swimming. And yeah, so I coached her, and she ended up going, I think, like 7:25 and got fifth at when the race that she did at 20 bridges. So yeah, I've seen more and more of that. There's more and more triathletes that are talking about trying to, maybe tackle the Triple Crown and go after, English Channel, Catalina, and Manhattan Island Marathon swim. So yeah, I've been seeing that movement, and it's just people looking for different challenges, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting. I guess we're all too comfortable. We have to put ourselves in some really interesting spots to get our real human.
Well, and I think, a lot of the triathletes have gotten to the point where, that sport has gotten fairly expensive. Not that marathon swimming is a cheap endeavor. But it's the bike and the gear, and then a lot of them get to the point where they're in their 50s and 60s, and running isn't really an option anymore. So they go to swimming. So
yeah, come to the water. That's what I say.
Exactly.
Come to the water.
Exactly.
So let's see, we wanted to jump in, and one of the questions people wanted to hear about was feed and feed planning. How do you kind of take your clients on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, with the athletes I work with, it's a really kind of individual process. And the thing about it is, just find something that works for you, that you like, that you think you can, if you're doing 10K plus, Find something that works for you, that you think you can drink for, 4, 5, 6 hours. And go from there and experiment around with stuff. And, the biggest thing is, and this is all kind of like I worked with a guy that I'm still coaching that just did the length of Lake Tahoe I think it was back in July. And, with that race, you start at night. I think he started about 10 p.m. You swim through the night. He made sure I think it was like 9 or 10 in the morning, something like that. And, it's cold. It was cold overnight. Like the water was actually warmer than the air temp. With that, you just want a wide variety of stuff that you can eat. It becomes even a different challenge when you're in salt water, where you want to bring some, mouthwash along just to kind of swig out your mouth so your tongue doesn't swell too much and you can get that horrible taste out of your mouth. So at least you can try to drink or eat something. But yeah, it's just have a wide variety of stuff. Have stuff that's cold, have stuff that's warm, have stuff that's salty, have stuff that's sweet. And just find out what works for you and what your gut can tolerate. And then past that, try to feed every 30 minutes. Yeah. So I swam with a guy in college. He was when FINA started to do marathon world championships. Mm-hmm. And back then it was 25K. So he was the first 2 or 3 years, he was a 25K world champion. And then he ended up setting the English Channel crossing record and held it for about 15 or 20 years. It was Chad Hundeby, and he just actually passed away. Yeah, tragic. I mean, heart attack at 50.
Oh, geez. Wow.
I know. But yeah, I mean, I remember talking to him about it after he did it. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, the biggest thing was he didn't ever feed. He'd feed every 30 minutes, but he tried to reduce the amount of time that he fed.
Yeah.
So he got it down to like 20 or 30 seconds.
Yeah.
He knew that it was going to be, if he was going to go after the record, it was going to have to be on that level of precision, right, where every kind of second counted. And even over, because he was like 720, I think, 725. And he told me about you get that week window to do the English Channel, and it's all dependent on the weather.
Right.
And a lot of people will be there, and the window will come and go, and there was just not a day when you could go swim.
Yeah.
And he got there, flew in, they landed, they took a look at the weather, and it was like glass. And he goes, "Let's go." And basically
8 hours
right in.
That's amazing. Yeah,
right in. But yeah, in terms just in feeding though, just find something that you like that works for you, play around with it a little bit, and go from there. And we had talked about this kind of before we got online. I crewed for a guy that did Badwater, which is that running race that goes from Death Valley to Mount Whitney. And we had everything he could possibly want. We had cold stuff, warm stuff, salty, sweet. A lot of started out with like gels and different types of drinks. So I think we had everything from Tailwind to Martin to Infinite, a custom blend of Infinite to coconut water. And he had some issues kind of along the way, a little bit of heat exhaustion, heat stroke, threw up. That was about from 25 miles to 80 miles. We were kind of just like keeping him moving with just kind of like putting more and more duct tape on it. Oh, and we finally got him to the point where he was feeling better. And, but yeah, that night that he was running, the only thing that we could really get him to eat when the second wave of kind of nausea came up was animal crackers.
Wow. Yeah.
That was the only thing he would take down was animal crackers.
Yeah.
And we had bought like this big Costco thing, thinking us and the crew were just going to be munching on that. Right. And that was the only thing he wanted was animal crackers.
Man, I have a new feed thing to bring on the boat next time. I thought I brought a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It really
But
is.
yeah, and you're gonna want something solid.
Yeah,
If
I
you're
think
doing,
for me, it's like 4 or 5 hours in. I know there
yeah,
are some people that can do liquids the whole time, but I'm one
yeah,
that can
yeah.
maybe.
A lot of the pro triathletes that I work with do liquids a lot. Do liquids for a whole Ironman. And they're going, 7, 8 hours for their Ironmans.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got one guy that he's Hungarian and he's like tough as nails. And he basically, for like his bike nutrition, squirts like a dozen gels into a bottle, doesn't cut it and just sips on that the whole thing.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, he's got like like this gut that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be my biggest piece of advice is make sure you try what you're, try to, but be prepared to be flexible. Like having the cold, the hot, salty, the sweet on board is awesome. Definitely though, and don't forget to bring the Gas X and the Pepto-Bismol and all the stuff for the stomach discomfort, because I ended up leaving behind like carb drinks and going into the swim this year, just like thinking I was going to do it with more real food. And I think that ended up being a little bit to my demise because my body started shutting down. But I think I was trying to process like really big calorie, like trying to, so that ended up being this other side of the coin that I learned about, which was
when you start taking those things that are harder to digest, all the blood gets diverted.
All
the blood gets diverted to your gut. And there's not enough going around.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my learning this year. But I just, with the carb drinks, I guess I just really, the bloating and discomfort was so uncomfortable for me when I did Tahoe. And I think that both my trips from Tahoe that I did, it was just like, I didn't want that discomfort. I would rather be hungry. So be sure you try it and be prepared to try everything and bring everything with you and be flexible, because that's what's, I think the way that story you told about the individual that did Badwater, it's like, know too that you're probably going to upchuck your feeds at some point, and that's okay. You can keep going if you have the will to keep going. Part of the game.
And hopefully you've got a good crew that's watching you and monitoring you, and they're going to pull you if it's not looking good.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. I think that's a pretty good roundup on feed and feed planning. What about anything you want to add on that before we move on to the next one?
No, I mean, look, it tends to be just like we started at the beginning. It tends to be just a very personal thing that you've got to figure out. Ultimately.
Make a plan and then bring everything else along too.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other one we wanted to jump into today was balancing training with family, life, work. What's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's one of those things where, especially if you've got work and you got family, those are all stakeholders in this passion hobby that you're pursuing. And, if you're going to tackle some of these big kind of goals, and I'm thinking kind of English Channel, Catalina Channel, you want to swim the length of Tahoe, Manhattan Island Marathon swim, make sure you've got your whole team on board with doing that, because it's not an insignificant kind of undertaking if you want to do it well. And there's just a lot of training involved. It's I mean, most of these swims are, for a good swimmer, for a really experienced swimmer, 10+ hours. And if you don't come from a swimming background, then it's going to be even longer. So you've just got to put in the time and make sure that everyone is on board with what you're doing.
So how do you see that time kind of breaking down in the training realm?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what type of athlete. Again, we get back to this kind of individual thing. But in general, what I try to get to is, and I tend to not look at yardage as being a huge metric other than a general kind of guideline, where I try to figure out what the total distance they're going to be swimming is. So for Tahoe, we knew it was going to be about 36,000 yards. And so then the goal is to build up to that for a week of training. And, I tend to promote more quality over quantity. So if that 36,000 that we do in a week, a really significant part of it is going to be fairly well above race-based training. And so, the one thing that I found out with the triathletes, and when I started to work with triathletes, if I was training a swimmer, and I've worked with swimmers that have, qualified for like US Open Water Nationals, so 5, 10K. And, they're, swimming somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 50 to 70,000. Okay, let's call it in a week, 50 to 65. They're 20 to 25 hours a week total training, maybe 20 in the pool, another 3 to 4 kind of dry land stuff. So I started to work with the triathletes, and they were like, okay, we've got a 2.4 mile swim. I don't come from a swim background, but you've got 3 hours a week to train. So I had to kind of think, okay, well, the standard kind of orthodox swim approach to things we're not going to be able to do it because we're not going to be able to manage kind of a volume approach to things. So the other aspect was, if we did more of a race pace approach, a more high intensity approach, shorter reps focused on the stroke, but at or above kind of race pace more often, could we fit 10 pounds of flour in a 5-pound bag, essentially.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. We'll tend to do elements of kind of Dave Salo wrote a book a long time ago when he was doing this, when he kind of developed this idea of race-based training versus kind of what was prevalent at the time, which was Mission Viejo swimming 3 times a week and 150,000 a week for their distance swimmers.
Right.
He said, well, you can do it on a lot less. And my kind of observation is it's about 40% less. So if you do a traditional kind of like volume approach where you're kind of at a subcritical pace most of the time, and versus kind of more of a high intensity approach, you can get to the same spot on about 40% less yardage. And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it would be starting out, especially if you're, say, 6 months out from the event, that you're lifting weights 3 times a week for about an hour to an hour and a half. And I found some pretty good programs that are swimming specific that work out really well. And it's really reduced the amount of injuries that you can typically run into with shoulder issues, especially at the end of a long build. So,
yeah, that's interesting. I guess I had this interesting experience this year with my swim where I never really got to ramp up yards at all, but I had the benefit of all of my past, I guess, swim experiences. Like I was, So, I mean, I had been sick for an entire month leading up to this swim in Lake George, but I was able to think like, well, so all of my big training swims, whatever, nothing really happened. I was able to get 1 5-hour swim in, and I was prepared, and I was planning to do like across and back Lake George, which would have been like 40 plus hours.
Yep.
But I knew that was a huge stretch considering how long I'd been sick. But but going into the swim, I was able to, I mean, I knew last year I had done 26 miles. So I'm like, okay, I can get to the other side.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. It's like having that confidence of experience, and like, when can that be kind of extrapolated to like, okay, well, for this one, you'll probably be okay. But then there's also this critical race pace thing where I don't train like race training at all. And I'm trying to I want to get more to that place, but I just haven't been there. Everything for me is just it's a lot of technique work is about almost all I'm doing with tempo, but it's been interesting. It's been an interesting journey to see like what you can do basically with a strong technique foundation.
Without a doubt. And that was kind of the other aspect of how I'm training athletes is I knew that if we've got 3 hours a week to train for a 2.4 mile swim,
Yeah.
And they didn't come from a swim background, that, most of their techniques pretty horrible.
Right.
And I knew I didn't have much time to do kind of traditional drill work
Mm-hmm.
within that 3 hours, because in 3 hours, you're basically not even training enough to build up the strength and conditioning you need to do the distance.
Barely. Yeah.
And so, how do you get, again, this idea of how do you get 10 pounds of flour in a 5-pound bag? So I've gotten to a lot more of kind of constraint led kind of training, where we'll use, like, I don't know if you've seen some of the Aquavolo products. They've got like drag socks and mitts that diminish your feel for the water. I've used the brick kickboard, which is a weighted kickboard, that really kind of forces you kind of to get core engagement. And so we've kind of done all of these things where, yeah, we're working on technique, but we're also driving strength and conditioning and fitness to support that technique at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing I could show somebody how to do swim really well for 15 seconds. But if you don't have the strength and conditioning and the mental focus requisite for holding it for 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 16 hours, doesn't matter what your technique looks like, because you're going to go to kind of the least common denominator, wherever your kind of brain and body settle in on.
Yeah. There's the thing too with triathletes where I feel like all bets are off once they get in the water, because everyone's just like, it's every man for themselves.
Yeah.
To the end of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I worked for Ironman for a while, and I was a swim course director for 3 events. And yeah, I mean, when you had 2,500 people going in the water, and I was only there where we did a mass start once. But when you're responsible for the 2,500 people that are in the water, and you have these mass starts, and you look at it, and it's just this melee of people kind of swimming over one another. And if something happens to somebody in the middle of that pack, there's no getting into them until everyone's kind of swum over them. So yeah, it's a little bit nerve wracking. So it's nice that Ironman's moved away from those kind of mass starts, but yeah.
Oh man. Anything else you want to add on the training front? I guess you were talking a little bit before we started recording about differences between running and swimming.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I've seen is, triathlon community isn't great in terms of their swim training knowledge. And, I mean, just observationally, it's probably because most of the coaches within triathlon come from a running background. There's some cyclists, and then there's a few swimmers, but most of the kind of triathlon coaches come from a running background. And so, it's the traditional kind of run build for a marathon, which is, you build up to 16-mile, one long run a week, then you're 18, then it's 20, then out from the, might be 22, but typically 20 is what people build up to. And it's just this long, slow, straight run. And, I've seen a lot of, as triathletes have moved over into the kind of open water marathon swim space, I've seen that mentality and that kind of idea around training migrate with them. And, there's just a lot better ways to efficiently and effectively train for an open water swim than kind of modeling it after how you would train for a marathon run.
Actually, that's kind of where I started when I first was training was, more that there's like some kind of base and like technique work that you should be trying to maintain, but then having a distance day where you kind of let your mind spin a little bit, that you're also, a little bit of that confidence boosting swim. But then rather than it being like the long, slow slog build, I guess I kind of went back to the confidence of experience need and like getting these milestone swims in there, that it's like I needed, basically had 2 young kids, and I needed to, like, a block off a day where I could say, okay, I'm the only thing, you got the kids, the only thing I'm doing today is a long swim, and that's my confidence boost, a little like but I guess I found with my clients that setting in those kind of milestone swims is like confidence boosts, just gives them the confidence they need, that maybe it isn't like this long, slow slog buildup, but that basically there's something there as far as like some kind of maintaining, and then just kind of these like
Yeah.
tests.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, I can understand that. I think that a lot of times, and you see this in triathlon too, particularly Ironman, where people that have no experience in triathlon, and you'd see it at like the introductory dinner all the time, because they'd ask, who's done a triathlon before? And, some people would, or who has done an Ironman before? Is this your first Ironman? And they'd raise their hand. And then how many of you, this was your first triathlon? And their hand would still be up. And it'd be like 25, 30% of the people that would go from no triathlon racing experience to an Ironman.
Mm-hmm.
And, I understand why Ironman's doing it. They sell kind of a, there are no limits kind of dream. And, you can go from the couch to Ironman in, 6 months. And yeah, you'd need to kind of build, but I'd rather kind of with an athlete take them where, okay, you want to do a marathon swim. And a lot of times with the marathon swims, as you've got to build up a resume before they're even going to let you do it. It's not like Ironman where you're just like, yeah, I'm going to go out and do an Ironman. Sign me up. Here's my 650.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what Ironman doesn't really care. Hey, you don't have any experience, you're going to DNF? Yeah, we don't care. But yeah, I mean, I think the open water swim community is a little bit more responsible than Ironman in terms of, hey, yeah, if you want to do, kind of a marathon swim, at least show you've done a 5K in cold water or a 10K in cold water, and a lot of those, like I do a 10K, and, you have to have a certain kind of time cutoff in the past that you can demonstrate. Hey, I did a 5K at one point. Or I did an Ironman in under, I think I have the Ironman swim is under an hour 35 or under an hour 40.
Wow.
So, and then that you've got some people that have put in some training, they've got some experience. And yeah, so those would be some of the differences that I'd see between the two of Ironman and marathon swimming.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That are positive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that point you made too about just like the buildup, I think that's the only way I was able to go into the swim I did this year, was that I had 9 years of
without a doubt,
little by little every year. So
well, and now I can kind of segue into what I was going to mention earlier, which is, and this is what I've been dealing with within with triathletes, especially pros. The big idea within endurance training is that, and this has been around for 60, 70 years, because it's mostly this is what's been studied in the lab, which is VO2 max. So your maximum volume oxygen you can take in, which is, how aerobic you can be, how much oxygen you can deliver to your muscles. So can you keep on going longer and longer and faster and faster? That's been the paradigm. And the argument that I've been making now for the last few years is that, it's an incomplete paradigm. And, at the end of the day, particularly swimming. So if we look at kind of the triathlon, which legs of the race are the most skill dependent and which are the least skill dependent? Well, the least skill dependent is the bike. You're pressing a pedal up and down in a closed mechanical loop. Yes, there is expertise with bike handling and getting into aero, but for the most part, it's a very kind of aerobically driven kind of sport, and hews more to along the lines of who has the higher VO2 max is going to probably do a little bit better. Okay? Now, not totally that along those lines, but for the most part. The next is the run. You've got to have a little bit more running expertise, training, but again, this is something that we've been doing and building up those kind of movements in our body since we crawled. That cross connection is there from when we're crawling, just like in the run. Okay. The swim is the most skill dependent, I would argue by a lot compared to the other two.
Yeah.
And so if you look at kind of, and touching on something that you said with, that you had this 9 years of experience that carried you through. Well, it did. Because the majority of that skill resides in your brain and your nervous system.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's the reason why, I'm almost 50 years old, and most of the pro triathletes, if I got in the water with them, even though I'm disgustingly out of shape, if we swam a 50 free, I could beat still all of them, probably even up to about 100. Past that would be a different story.
Right.
But yeah, and it's because of the skill that I developed along the way. So if you look at it this way, that the primary thing that you are training is the brain and the nervous system. And a part of that skill of, swimming a very fast, efficient, open water marathon is VO2 max, or aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, building mitochondrial density in the muscles, all of these things that are part of that skill, that overall skill. Okay. But those parts are really just a byproduct of training the brain and the nervous system to do that skill. So it basically flips it, if you look at it from strictly just a physiological perspective of let's build up VO2 max, let's build up the base, let's swim the distance, I want to get in the aerobic capacity, then you're really turning what the training should be on its head. No pun intended.
Yeah.
And what you should be thinking about is, hey, am I really focused on my movement while I'm going really, really hard in practice? Okay. Because if you're looking at kind of adult neuroplasticity or adult learning, you need two things to change a motor movement pattern. You need focus with a sense of urgency. So, think about whenever you're doing a really hard math problem and you get frustrated, that sense of frustration. That's kind of what you're looking for. And that's a very specific chemical being released in your brain called acetylcholine that marks those neurons that you're using at that point to be changed later on. The change later on happens with sleep, during sleep, or during non-sleep deep rest like meditation.
Yeah.
That's when those neurons, that skill gets updated or added to.
Yeah.
And so that's ultimately what we're really training here.
Yeah. Yep. I love that because it segues really well into like what I've been putting together for training programs for people kind of virtually, is like just that, the person on the deck isn't the one that can tell you how to do it. You got to take the time to internalize the work.
And so it becomes about your attention and where you can focus it.
Yes.
And how long you can focus it there. Exactly. And eventually what you want to try to develop with this attention is that you can hold it like a spotlight on anything you want for as long as you want.
Yep.
And, the three things that are most likely to hijack your attention are a threat, which makes sense. That's going to grab your attention pretty quickly. Yeah. A bad mood.
Yeah.
So if you come into a workout in a bad mood, it's going to be tough to focus.
Yeah.
And the third one is stress, and that could be physical or emotional. Yeah. And but that's typically where, for swimming and in practice, stress is what's going to be most likely to hijack your focus, and what's most likely to take you off. If you're trying to change from entering the water like this to this, when you start getting stressed, the natural instinct is going to be to go back to here.
Yep.
And you're going to lose focus on it.
Yep.
But if you can hold it and keep it just going to where that new motor movement pattern you want to make is, even when you're stressed out, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. That's where that change is going to happen.
Yep. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, because our attention is so important.
It is.
So it's so interesting to me too, because I think a lot of people, maybe even marathon swimmers, maybe especially, I don't know, they use swimming as a, this release, and which it is, all of these things,
without a doubt.
But it's like finding that time to do that focused training to make that change and make it stick is, I think it's really important. It's really helpful.
Oh, it is.
You make
Yeah,
it
without a
change,
doubt.
yeah, for a really long time.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Tim.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
I'm going to stop the recording and